Hello everyone, I'm Seiben and welcome back to more Magic the Gathering lore. With Magic Origins bringing us revamped backgrounds for some of our favorite Planeswalkers, I thought it was about time to do a video on a much requested character. His origins were just revealed, so now let's examine the full story of Gideon Jura. Gideon, the example of perfection in combat, was not always the great man we see today. His origins bring us back to his home plane of Theros, a world controlled by powerful gods. The inhabitants of Theros believe in honor, respect, and glory, the traits one strives for to gain favor by the gods. Here, a young Gideon was actually named Kytheon Iora. He wasn't a physically impressive boy by anyone's standards. He was shorter and lankier than most other kids his age in the city of Akros. Akros, the home of Kytheon, is a city built on the spears of great warriors, so it came to no surprise that he himself wanted to live the life of a soldier. Young Kytheon joined the army at a very young age to start his lifelong training to become a hoplite. He always wanted to prove himself, to make his body like marble and protect those who couldn't do so themselves. But oddly enough, his desire to protect the weak would eventually lead to his expulsion from the army. Kytheon lived in a section of Akros known as the Foreigners' Quarter. This was the designated area for residents not native to Akros, but it also became home for the city's outcasts and criminals. As such, this quarter was rarely thought about by the city's high council, rarely policed, and riddled with crime. From the time he was able to fight, Kytheon always stood up against those who would do harm to the disenfranchised people of the Foreigners' Quarter. With his training as a hoplite, Kytheon was now able to take on opponents 3 times his size. His goal, to eliminate the major crime lords which made this area their headquarters. As he went around punching the bullies of the quarter, as he referred to them, Kytheon made a number of allies, and of course, he made a great deal of enemies as well. His gang of justified protectors and their families were regularly targeted by criminal organizations, leading to their further decline into poverty. Soon, all the people he cared about couldn't even afford food to eat. He and his gang were forced to steal, but he would only steal from those who had excess, and he never stole from those in the Foreigners' Quarter. Getting caught on several occasions, Kytheon was expelled from the army and lost all the rights and privileges he would have gained from being a hoplite. Kytheon was no stranger to Akros' prison system, being incarcerated on and off for a few years now. Yet, it seemed that he was always able to escape his captors, eventually, never serving one of his full sentences. His rap sheet was so long that the next time he was arrested, he was set to work hard labor for 10 years of his life. Only a single day into his sentence, Kytheon heard rumors of a huge monster of a man who was imprisoned with him. This brute was known as the King, but Kytheon thought of him as just another bully, like all the others he had dealt with in the Foreigners' Quarter. Kytheon was set to push a water wheel for several hours a day. In truth, he actually enjoyed the work. It made his body strong, like the hoplite he would have been. During a break, he was given water and a small portion of stale bread, food that he was actually quite accustomed to. Yet, even here, people were always trying to take from those who couldn't stop it. A man with a bag approached the exhausted prisoners, demanding tribute to the king. One by one, the others relinquished half of their rations over. Kytheon refused, which of course would upset this so-called king, this Ristos fellow. But the man collecting the tribute was not Ristos, he was just another henchman. Kytheon's refusal caused the burly man to attack, but his punches never hit their target. Though his opponent was much larger than him, Kytheon was in his element. He was born to fight, and he was quite good at it. With every dodge, the young boy was able to land another series of blows to the man's stomach and jaw. The thug was harder to take down than Kytheon first anticipated. As he was slightly distracted by the gathering crowd, he was knocked to the ground. The man began to rain down blow after blow onto Kytheon's face. As he was being assaulted, a surge of white light grew across his skin and it expanded. This energy protected Kytheon. The force of the thug's punches were deflected as if they were a gust from a soft breeze. After soundly defeating his opponent, Ristos himself showed up with more thugs. Kytheon defeated them all. He suffered injuries himself, but he won. After the brawl, Kytheon was dragged to the office of the prison warden, a tall, broad, seasoned warrior named Hixus. Hixus was impressed by the boy, and realized that Kytheon was no average street criminal. This young boy fought for what he believed in. He didn't fight for gold or out of hate. He fought to protect others, for justice, and for himself. From that meeting on, Hixus took the young Kytheon under his wing and began training him in the magical art of hieromancy. Hieromancy was known as the law magic, but this wasn't really true in the eyes of Hixus. Laws are made by people, laws can be changed, but this magic was the source of true justice. For 4 years, Kytheon spent his life dutifully training under Hixus, while also serving his sentence pushing the heavy water wheel. This combination of training left Kytheon strong in both mind and body. He was certainly a formidable fighter and hieromancer. One day, Kytheon was excused from his normal duties. His city was under attack. The polis, the center of religious practice and worship of the gods, was besieged by harpies. The guards and stationed warriors there were losing ground. Akros would need the help of all of its citizens, even its criminals, if it were to survive this attack. The prisoners were offered freedom in exchange for fighting for their polis, and Hixus grabbed Kytheon from his cell personally. The mass of prisoners faced off against these feathered monstrosities, who swooped down and tore through the ranks of the untrained militia. Kytheon faced off against several of these beasts, using chains made of pure light to bind them to the ground, killing many, but also suffering a number of injuries. There were just too many of the monsters. Hope seemed like a fleeting prospect. Then, Kytheon saw a great white light appear in the sky. It was Hixus, the most powerful hieromancer on Theros, using his full power. In a flash of white light, every harpy was bound to the earth by magical chains. While Hixus could only hold them for a moment, it was enough time for Kytheon and the other prisoners to butcher the beasts. This was not the end of the attack, however. The sentry's call sent out a chill down the spines of the entire city. Cyclopses were approaching. Kytheon realized that the high walls protected a majority of the city, but his home of the foreigners' quarter was vulnerable. He rushed to check on his old stomping grounds, and to his horror, he spotted 3 of the lumbering monsters heading towards its walls. He saw that another member of his irregulars, named Xenon, was already hard at work barricading the gates of the quarter. This was a good sight to see. The irregulars still worked to protect the people, but Kytheon knew it wasn't enough to protect against the Cyclops. The 3 Cyclopses made it to the thin bridge which separated them from the city's gate, and Kytheon suggested a crazy idea. They'd bring the fight to these monsters, outside the walls and away from the defenseless people. His irregulars were skeptical, but put their trust in their leader like they always had. If there was one thing Kytheon had proven as the leader of the irregulars, it was that he was rarely wrong when it came to a fight. Unlike the trio of Cyclops, the irregulars worked together in perfect harmony. When all was said and done, the city was in a state of uneasy calm. The initial threats were eliminated, but another wave could appear at any moment. Kytheon went out to scout ahead to see if more monsters were making their way towards the city. He found no monsters, but he did find a man. It was a man like none other he had ever seen before. He had long glowing hair, and carried a spear which burned as bright as the sun itself. The man revealed himself to be Heliod, god of the sun and the leader of the pantheon of gods on Theros. Kytheon was shocked to be in the presence of such a figure, one which he had worshipped since he was no more than an infant. But Heliod didn't appear for the fighter's admiration, he was there to congratulate him. Heliod told Kytheon that the monsters that attacked his polis were sent there by another god's actions, and were his first test to becoming the sun god's champion. Heliod saw that Kytheon was indeed capable of becoming his champion, and so he set him to the task of dealing with the god who had sent the monsters. The creatures had not attacked the polis out of malice, they were in fact escaping from a far greater threat. Erebos, the god of the dead and ruler of the underworld, had sent a horrific titan of death towards Akros, and the beasts were simply running away from it. Erebos was out to reclaim the souls of those who had escaped his underworld. This was the task of his titan, and it was Kytheon's task to stop and kill this titan of a god. Do that, and Heliod would claim him as his champion. To aid him in this task, Heliod awarded him with the Sun Spear, a godly weapon which could defeat the titan. Kytheon agreed to the challenge, but quickly found that a titan is not some foe you can easily slay. He would have to call upon the help of his irregulars once again. As true as they had always been, his irregulars answered this call and went to help their leader. The titan was in pursuit of Kytheon, who was running away, apparently defeated in spirit. This was all a ruse, as Kytheon led the Titan to the Irregular's trap. They jumped from behind a rock and took the Titan, who was unprepared for such an attack. Its giant flail mace whipped around its head, and Kytheon conjured a spell of pure light to wedge between the Titan's elbow. This magical halt caused the giant's mace to swing wildly and strike the monster in its back. Crippled over in pain, Kytheon and the Irregulars managed to finish it off. These young kids managed to do the impossible. They worked together and managed to defeat a Titan, a servant to the god of death itself. Kytheon looked at his allies and his heart filled with pride and love. This pride faded as smoke appeared around him and his gang. The feeling of triumph turned to one of fear and dread. The smoke formed into a shape, the shape of a man, but not a man. It was Erebos, god of the underworld. Though his Titan was defeated, Erebos still had to claim the souls he was promised. Kytheon, even now in the presence of a god who meant to kill him, saw Erebos as nothing more than a bully. God or not, it was just another figure of strength who was out to harm the weak. Kytheon had faced these figures his entire life, and he would not back down now. He threw the Spear of the Sun God towards Erebos. With its speed and accuracy, it would pierce the god right through his chest. But this was not Kytheon's average opponent. Erebos was not a bully. He was a force of nature. He only took the lives of those whose time it was for them to die. With a flick of his shadowy wrists, Erebos' magical whip deflected the spear back towards Kytheon. He saw this counterattack coming and white aura covered his body. His training as a Heromancer left him prepared to defend himself from any attack. The spear struck Kytheon with so much force that the enchanted weapon exploded. The fire deflected off Kytheon's body, just as the thug's punches had almost 4 years prior. As the smoke settled, Kytheon found that he had taken no injuries, but saw spots of blood all over his body. As he scanned the devastated area, he found the source of the blood. His Irregulars, the men who followed him on this dangerous mission, the men who he had fought for and beside so many times in the past. They had all been destroyed, their bodies displayed all around the battlefield. Kytheon was overcome by anguish. He forgot about Erebos, he forgot about Heliod, hell, he forgot about himself. His body began to shake as he screamed out. He experienced a pain worse than any he had felt before. White energy began to pulse around Kytheon faster and faster, as he lost complete sight of the world around him. Kytheon didn't even bother to look up from the ground he was staring at. By the time he did manage this, he was greeted by an unfamiliar sight. It was a lion, clad in armor as if it were a warhorse from Akros. He was then greeted by a woman, who called herself Mukir, who wore strange clothing. Kytheon was confused and asked where he was. The woman responded that he was in the nation of Bant. She asked for his name, and Kytheon only managed to choke out an utterance of it. The woman attempted to confirm that she in fact heard his name correctly. It was Gideon, wasn't it? Kytheon realized that he had left Theros. His home was gone and his friends were all dead. The pain was too much to bear. He accepted his new name of Gideon Jura, but the ordeals were far from over for this young Planeswalker. So this is the updated origin to Gideon's story, and if you ask me, there are just so many differences from the original that it's unbelievable. There are 3 key elements from his old story which just never made it into this revision. First is Gideon's master, the one who teaches him Heromancy. In the old lore, his teacher took him from prison and taught him Heromancy. This nameless teacher taught Gideon its magic and about Planeswalkers, one of which had been his own teacher years ago. Obviously, the revised version does not mention any Planeswalking teacher, nor is Hixus a Planeswalker. The next missing element is Gideon's signature weapon, the Surl. The Surl is a multi-lashed whip that, in the original story, is gifted to him by his teacher as a reward for having his spark ignite. Now in this new story, no mention of his iconic weapon is made, and we are basically left to wonder how he obtained it. The last element I want to mention which is missing is probably the biggest oversight in my opinion, and it has to do with how his spark ignited. In the original story, it was said that Gideon ascended when he beat an opponent so superior to himself that the unlikelihood of his survival ignited his spark. This led to a bunch of theories that Gideon had killed a god, noting that the red-green aligned god was missing during the events of the Theros block. I mean, it's a really cool theory. Gideon kills a god and becomes a Planeswalker, then Xenagos takes that god's place during Theros. But this isn't the case apparently. Gideon's spark is ignited because of the emotional loss of his friends, not the defeat of a strong opponent. I really feel like the writing has kind of failed here. They had the opportunity to pen a really cool fight, but they didn't. You can say that him beating the Titan was the strong opponent, but even so, he had a godly weapon and his own gang to back him up, so it wasn't like impossible for Gideon to win. While I was reading, just every fight Gideon was involved with seemed too small to cause his spark to ignite, up until Erebos showed himself. I saw Erebos and I was like, oh sweet, here it comes, the fight that will finally ignite his spark. And boom, like that, all of his friends are dead and he goes to Bant. It's really anticlimactic in my opinion. Now, I do feel like Gideon as a character is really defined now, you know, with the whole killing all of his friends with his own attack thing. But I also feel like these Planeswalkers are all starting to look the same. Yes, they all may have different motivations, but you can see that their triggers for Ascension are very similar. This new story also leaves a lot of funny inconsistencies with his old story. Most notably is found in the trailer for the MTG Duels of the Planeswalkers in 2012. The trailer is narrated by Gideon, whose voice actor mistakenly says that his home is long since destroyed, implying that it's Bant. I know it's minor, but I just found it kind of funny. From this point on, guys, I'm gonna have to admit something here. Gideon is a character whose lore is just not all there for me. We know that he first travels to Bant, but honestly, I have no clue what he does there. You can see I've done my research into Alara with my video I've done on that plane, but I found nothing about Gideon. Hell, Elspeth fights for Bant, and there still isn't any mention of Gideon. The next time we see Gideon is during the Purifying Fire event, which focuses mainly on Chandra and Nalaar. He traveled to the plane of Ragatha in search for a rumored fountain of white mana which took the shape of a fire. This fire was under guard by the organization called the Order of Heliod. This organization's leader denied Gideon the chance to see this flame, but offered him a chance if he successfully completed a task for him. Gideon was charged with finding and bringing to justice the pyromancer Chandra. Most of this story I already covered in Chandra's old lore video, which you can follow here or the link in the description below. So with that, let's see how all this ties into Gideon. Well, we find him chasing after Chandra like a love-struck puppy, feeling bad about capturing her and whatnot. He follows her to Zendikar, but he loses her track in the mountain of Akum around the Eye of Ugin. Chandra, with the help of numerous other planeswalkers, had accidentally released the Titan gods known as the Eldrazi. But at this time, Gideon wasn't aware of it. He was back at a fort known as Fort Kef, just resting when he heard rumors of the monsters. Shortly after, Gideon would experience their devastation firsthand when one of the Titan gods, known as Emrakul, arrived. This colorless entity sent scores of its broodlings to devour the fort, but Gideon fought beside these fellow soldiers and pushed the beasts back. It wasn't until Emrakul itself rose from the horizon that Gideon started to doubt his abilities. Fearing that all those in the fort would die, he ordered everyone to escape through an underground passage. Gideon initially thought to fight the god on his own, but once the realization of his certain defeat set in, Gideon began to brainstorm. There was no way that he could fight this thing on his own, so he traveled to find help. He planeswalked to a world called Ravnica, seeking a group of planeswalkers who were rumored to work there. I can only assume he's referring to the Infinite Custodium, but nevertheless, the group isn't there by the time he arrives. While he looks for help to save the inhabitants and the world of Zendikar, Gideon finds even more disturbing threats taking place on Ravnica. He finds a world on the brink of war. The guilds of Ravnica were at each other's throats and millions of innocent lives were at risk in the middle. He puts his Save Zendikar mission on hold as the loss of life on Ravnica would overshadow even all the lives on Zendikar. He gets into contact with the guild leader of the Boros Legion. This guild is the one that Gideon feels is the most likely to return Ravnica to peace. As he tries to find a peace between the guilds, he finds that even the Boros Legion are blinded by their hatred for the other guilds, leading to devastating attacks throughout the city. Gideon reconsiders his allegiance with the Boros, and most likely leaves to join the group known as the Gateless, those who do not define themselves by any guild. And this is where Gideon's story is left. He really doesn't appear much in the Return to Ravnica block, and it's never really disclosed what happens to him. I can assume that the events of Dragon Maze took place and Ravnica returned to an uneasy peace with Jace being the Guild Pact. We can only speculate what Gideon will do now, but with the battle for Zendikar coming up, I would place my bet that he will return to kick some Eldrazi butt. So there you go guys, the full story of Gideon Jura as it stands right now. I'd like to point out that Gideon's story is by far the most changed of any character in Magic the Gathering. All this change has left a lot of holes in his story, holes which I hope are filled with more information from Magic Origins. This character's story really did need a reboot, since not even I could really follow along with it. I may disagree with some of the things they've done with his origins, but overall it was something which needed to happen. I just hope now they finish the job so I can stop scratching my head over this guy's story. In any case guys, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, comment, and sub to the channel. All those things go a long way in helping support future content. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.